Well, how often have you heard the phrase, opposites attract? And while it's true for magnets, it's not really true for people, is it? We are drawn to other people by what we have in common, as in birds of a feather flock together. Think about those you know best, those who you can't wait to spend time with once this lockdown lifts. What is it that you do together? What do you talk about? My guess is that it's people who like to spend time doing things that you like to do. It's people who generally agree with your perspective on things. I can recall a time not so long ago when I discovered that one of my closest friends and I disagreed on a particular issue, and I was just shocked. Wait a second. How could she possibly think that? And I was afraid to even wade further into the conversation for fear that there was a whole bunch of more that I didn't know and I didn't want to know. Maybe it would risk our friendship. Issues of politics and religion are particularly good at polarizing us into groups where people are the same, or they think or act like everybody's the same, even if they're not. Those of you who have navigated relationships and marriages where you hold different positions on important issues like that know how challenging and difficult that can be. Social scientists have been studying this for years. And over again, what they discover is that people connect with those who are similar to themselves. What they are attracted to, what they like about one another, is the stuff they hold in common, the stuff that is similar. And why is that? Well, those of us like us make us feel good about ourselves, don't they? They don't challenge anything about us, and it's just easier, frankly. You don't have to engage in difficult conversation. Those people who are different from us stimulate feelings of challenge or confusion. They make us think. They make us reassess things we thought we knew or we thought we understood. And even when we're fascinated or excited by meeting someone who is very different, it still takes energy from us. And that can be hard to sustain. It can be hard to maintain grace and patience when you're in the middle of a severe disagreement. So despite the fairy tales and the romance novels that tell us opposites attract, it's really just not so. Now, I suppose we could decide that since this is the way things are and the way that humans are, we could decide that the best way to be is just to stick to our groups, our individual separate groups, our silos, our separated, sometimes gated neighborhoods and communities. We'll just stick with the people who are like us, let other people stick with those who are like them. We can coexist on this planet and never the twain shall meet. Well, except, of course, that we don't and we can't. In this increasingly global world, it's really hard to keep separate. We affect one another in ways we maybe didn't even know about. And just because we might be alike in one way, doesn't make us alike in other ways, does it? I invited people to wear their favorite colors today, in part to show that while we might be similar in our interest in attending Zoom church today, for example, we are different from each other in lots of other ways. And when we try and make ourselves the same, it leads us kind of always in a bad direction. And sometimes it even appears to start out with the best of intentions. I'll teach you something that I know for your own good. Okay, so far so good. But there's often a poisonous root underneath there, isn't there? That poisonous root that says, if you're not like me, and you don't do it the way I do it, and you don't know what I know, you're somehow less than me. And we know where that kind of poison leads. The world witnessed with great horror the Holocaust that happened when Adolf Hitler attempted to define community that was like him. And over the course of history, in every corner of the globe, we have seen and can see how this human tendency to hang out with and support those who are the same as we are and reject or change those who are not has led to repeating patterns of separation and isolation, and at its worst, things like slavery and genocide. There are so many examples throughout history of how this has happened. You can look at the killing fields of Cambodia or the Holodomor intentional famine in the Ukraine and Kazakhstan, apartheid, the Haiti massacre, the Rwandan genocide, the North American treatment of indigenous peoples and cultures. The examples are really too numerous to keep mentioning. And as much as we appreciate in others the things that are the same as us, the truth is that creation is just full of diversity. And messages about valuing that diversity show up in all of our faith teachings, from the stories of creation to Paul's comparison of the church like a human body. We can't all be the nose, we can't all be the foot, but we sure need the other parts, don't we? We need the eye, we need the elbow. And if we're afraid to be different with one another, we can't risk talking with each other about the things we might disagree about, for fear that we can't be in relationship when we disagree, like me and my friend. But in truth, if I value that friendship, I've got to figure out how to be in relationship with those with whom I disagree. I just have to figure it out. Rob Bell wrote, "If the gospel isn't good news for everybody, it isn't good news for anybody." And this is because the most powerful things happen when the church surrenders its desire to convert people and convince them to join. It's when the church gives itself away in radical acts of service and compassion, expecting nothing in return, that the way of Jesus is most vividly put on display. So to do this, the church has to stop thinking about everybody primarily in categories of in or out, saved or not, believer or non-believer. Besides the fact that these terms are offensive to those who are the un and the non, they work against Jesus' teachings about how we're supposed to treat one another. Jesus commanded us to love our neighbor, and our neighbor can be anybody. We are all created in the image of God. We are all sacred, valuable creations of God. Everybody matters, and to treat people differently based on who believes what is to fail to respect the image of God in everyone. As the book of James says, God shows no favoritism, so we don't either. Well, in the gospel reading today, this principle is brought into the realm of daily living. The disciples come across someone who, as they report to Jesus, was casting out demons in your name. So we put a stop to that because he was not one of us. Jesus, they're doing it wrong. And we told them they were doing it wrong, so we should get a gold star, right? And you should tell them and go tell them they're bad. They might as well be on an elementary school playground or in the modern political arena, where we are pretty good at assigning sides and blame and rewards. Because isn't this exactly how the judgment and the separation begins? In the comparing. You're doing it wrong. You're not supposed to be doing that. Which is another way of saying you're not doing it my way. or I'm supposed to be doing that. Have you ever seen that happen in your home? I'll bet you have. Think about those little things like how you put the dishes in the dishwasher, or how you put the toilet paper roll on the thing. Have you seen that? But in this story with his disciples, Jesus doesn't take the bait of choosing sides. He says, don't stop them. They're relieving suffering. How could I not want that? And the truth is, he says, if someone's doing good things in my name, they're not likely going to be going around saying bad things about me for long. And whether that's a deed of great healing power or even just offering a cup of cool water. Think about it. Whoever's not against us is for us. What I am noticing in this story is that in this one particular circumstance, Jesus' disciples are noticing differences between themselves and others, and then following the logic of birds of a feather, they use it to create separations and groups. Jesus notices the differences too. He doesn't erase them, not at all. But instead of using the differences to divide them into separate groups, he uses those differences to enlarge the whole flock. Those differences belong in the group. Whoever isn't against us is part of the team, our community, our family, our group. And they're part of that group with their differences intact. They don't have to follow the way the disciples follow to be included. Their differences make them a valuable part of the group. We live in polarizing times. It is very hard to be political without being partisan, which was what I think the church is called to be. Political, not partisan. And differences continue to be used to divide us. And yet, in the middle of a world pandemic, we know how vital it is that we understand ourselves to be part of a bigger human flock. As long as that virus is moving and adapting and changing among us, it remains a danger to all of us. And what we need to figure out is how to disagree profoundly without having all of those disagreements separate us. And do you know that conflict mediators will tell you that it's when you risk actually sharing the differences and sharing the values underneath your disagreements that you start to discover common ground. Those things that attract us to one another. I don't know if you've heard of the Maritime Bhangra Group. They're a group of students. I don't know if they're still all students, but they came to Nova Scotia as students from India, and they started dancing in a traditional way to kind of help bridge some of the culture gaps that they were encountering. And they started calling it joyful activism. And they're part of a documentary you maybe have seen called Behind the Bhangra Boys. And one of the great moments of the film is when these new immigrants and some indigenous people, some dancers, meet for the first time. And they discover that they share many of their own traditional dance moves. They're very different, but they discover that they share these traditional moves amongst them. And when they share the differences, they start to see the similarities, and together the flock gets bigger. Diversity is difficult. I should not suggest otherwise, especially in the details. And navigating those details takes time and patience. But when you do, it is the beauty that is in a patchwork quilt. It is the colors that form the rainbow. These are the gifts of God's creation for us. So may God help us see and embrace the differences among us so that we may also get to the ways we are truly connected. Amen.